Hey everyone, I'm Jamie, and you're watching another episode of Suncrest On Demand. Now, before we go any further, I'm sure someone is watching your first Suncrest On Demand video. I'm super excited that you're here. Help me help you. Text the word Suncrest to 94,000. When you do that, we'll send a digital gift card directly to your phone for some coffee, simply for getting this far in this video. Now, here's the tip for everyone watching. Make sure you have the Suncrest app. When you use our app, you get insider access to things like past content, upcoming events, stuff to help you, your kids, and your students engage with their faith journey, and much more. Actually, if you're looking to take a next step in your own faith journey right now, our app is the best tool to use. You can find the Next Steps button right on the homepage. Take a look right now to sign up for baptism, join a group to find your people here at Suncrest, or join a serving team and make a difference. In our app and on our website, you can also partner with us financially. Your generosity makes a huge difference in Northwest Indiana and beyond through starting new churches. So, on behalf of all of us, thank you for using your finances to change lives. Now, here's how the rest of this video is going to go. We're going to experience some music. In fact, let us know a lyric you found meaningful in the live chat or comments. We're going to experience communion. Each week, we focus on the sacrificial love of Jesus through a simple meal. So, now's the time to gather some food and drink to represent Jesus' body and blood. After the song is done, I'm going to put a timer on the screen. Feel free to eat and drink when you're ready. After communion is done, we'll listen to this week's message. Once that's done, let us know something meaningful you heard in the live chat or comments. So let's get going.
This is the word here in the flesh, living among the meek and lonely. The voice of God is every breath, salvation of the world unfolding. Behold him, behold him, lift up your eyes, see the Son of Heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus. This is his heart upon the cross, and from his wounds his mercies flowing. And now the dawn put death to death, and ever since that grave's been empty. Behold him, behold him, lift up your eyes, see the Son of Heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus. Behold him, behold him, lift up your eyes, see the Son of Heaven. Hosanna, Hosanna, pour out your praise, sing the name of Jesus. This is his home, here in our chest. At every door our Savior's knocking. Oh, let
whenever I get the chance to meet somebody, either for the first time or when we're going to have a more serious conversation, almost always the first question I ask is something like this: what's your story? What's your story? And of course, if we're talking particularly about faith, I ask, hey, what's your faith story? And it's so interesting to me how most people start to answer those questions. And, I don't condemn anyone for this, but if I say, what's your story? Almost always someone will say, well, I grew up in this hometown. I was born here. I did this or that. And I always think, oh, no, we're not to the story yet. You're giving me the background of the story, which is sometimes helpful. But the story of your life actually doesn't really start until you start making decisions. And the story of your faith in your life doesn't really start until you start deciding things about your faith. Like any good story, all stories, there's some drama to it. There's some conflict that's kind of creating a plot line, and the moments of tension where you could turn left or you could turn right. That's what I want to know. I want to know, so did you turn left or did you turn right? Why did you turn left or why did you turn right? And you can start to see into somebody's life who they really are based on the decisions they've made and why they made those decisions. And if you can start to listen to people tell the stories about the decisions they've made, you can really get to know somebody. That is who they are. And so I'm very excited to explore the second question tonight in this series, How to Decide. Let me go back to the beginning thesis. If you were here last week, you'll remember this. We believe that good questions lead actually to good decisions, and good decisions lead to a good life. And everybody wants a good life, right? So the theory here is, let's reverse engineer it. If this is true, and this is where we want to end up, let's work it backwards. Now, last week, if you were here, I told you that you could define the good life any way that you want to. And I thought about that all week long, and I thought, why did I tell you that? Why did I tell you that? There is a good life and a not so good life, and well, not all of us have the same definition. There's a couple things I want you to really lock in on. So one of the definitions of a good life, I think for everybody, is I don't get to the end of my life with major regrets. Or I don't get to the end of my life with unresolved regrets. That would be a good life if you can get there. And of course, some of you in the room are followers of Jesus, and some of you in the room aren't followers of Jesus. Those of you who aren't followers of Jesus, I'll let you define this to yourself. But for those of us who are followers of Jesus, there is a definition of what the good life looks like. And it's a beautiful, amazing life. But we want to end up there, the good life. The question is, how do you get there? And the answer to that is not complicated. It is all in your decision making. You might have hopes for your life. You might have dreams for your life. You might have good intentions for your life. You might even pray prayers about your life. But if your hopes and dreams and intentions are going this direction, but your decisions are going this direction, you're going to go wherever your decisions take you. So in that sense, your decisions are the steering wheel. They either turn your life left or right. And we're zeroed in on how to make sure we make the right turn. Now, after last week, I ended up in all kinds of great conversations. Some people were talking to me about the relationship decisions they had in front of them, and they had to decide, am I going left or am I going right? Some people in their businesses, this is so fascinating to me, some people are thinking, oh, maybe now's the right time to expand my business, but I'm not sure. Maybe the right time is to close my business, but I'm not sure. Maybe the professional life almost always has a left or a right. And even in our faith life, a lot of people, I did actually talk to one person who's not a follower of Jesus, and he said, this is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to become a follower of Jesus or if I'm not going to become a follower of Jesus. It actually feels like it's about time to decide. I've been looking at it long enough. And I'm like, this is a very significant decision. And you will either turn left or right, and they are consequential decisions. But how would you ever get to the right decision? That's the question. And actually, the answer to that is ask great questions. So instead of looking at things naively, over these 5 weeks, we have 5 questions that have ancient roots to them. And actually, since we're talking about stories, I think you could read almost any piece of great literature. You could see any great movie or great Broadway show, and you would see these are the fundamental questions that guide our decisions. But when you think about this, all of these questions are actually rooted in the sacred text that we call the Scriptures. And I think it could be a gift to you so that you tell the story you want with your life. Now, last week, there's one verse we mentioned that's going to guide us through all of this. And it's a very simple verse from the Wisdom of Solomon in the book of Proverbs. It says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge." There's one group of people, you're like that. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're the person who's prudent and you see danger and you take refuge. It says, but the simple or the naive or the ones in a hurry keep going and pay the penalty. And this isn't complicated. The prudent are the people who ask and answer great questions as they're trying to chart their decisions forward. And the simple are the ones who say, I don't have time for that. I'm just going to keep going and pay the penalty, end up with the regret. So last week was the integrity question. This week, a new question for you. This is what I call the legacy question. And the question is this: what story do I want to tell? When you get 5 years down the road from right now and you're telling people the story of your life, not the background, but the decisions that you've made, what story do you want to tell? When you get to the end of your life, or when your children talk about you, or your brother talks about you, what story do you want them to tell about you? And I got to tell you, every decision that we make shifts the story of our life a little bit. Think about this. Maybe you're at work and your boss asks you to lie to a client in order to get the deal. And you have a decision in front of you. And you could ask yourself, what story do I want to tell? And you might be tempted, and maybe you'd even decide to say, I'm afraid I'd lose my job if I don't lie. So I'm going to go ahead and lie so that we can land the account. But maybe after that happens, the client learns that you lied and he goes to your boss, and then your boss throws you under the bus and you lose your job. And all of a sudden you don't have a job and you lied. And that story is going to get told. You know that story is part of who you are at that stage. If instead you decided to tell your boss, I will not lie, and you lost your job, there's also a story that gets told there. And it may not be a story marked with happiness, but it is a story marked with nobility. And I'm asking you today to think, so what story do you want to tell? I see people all the time that, enter into a dating relationship, and, could be a guy or a girl, but they step into a relationship and they actually know this person isn't for me. I don't want a long-term future with them, but they're also lonely and they don't want to be the third wheel at another party. And so out of those kind of decisions, they might turn left and say, well, I'm just gonna go out with him. Well, I'm just gonna sleep with him. Well, I'm just gonna move in with him. And 2 years later, there's a story that they don't want told, but it's actually just a result of the decisions that they've made. Instead of making what might be a more difficult but more noble decision to turn the other direction. Maybe the most fundamental place where we, especially followers of Jesus, find ourselves with a story to be determined is making the choice between personal comfort and changing the world, making a difference, impacting somebody else's life. Those decisions are in front of us all the time. And we get to decide. I can choose personal comfort. I can take it easy. I can be selfish with my time, or I can change the world. I can invest in somebody else. I can do something that costs me but might make a difference. And we all get to, after that's all said and done, tell the story of what we decided. Now, these are not simple things to do. And one of the reasons that it's difficult to make good decisions, even with your story in mind, is that strong feelings create a fog. There are feelings that get generated. Sometimes they're good feelings, sometimes they're bad feelings. I'm just telling you that when strong feelings enter into the equation, they tend to create a fog where you could either keep going and pay the penalty, or you could be prudent and stop and ask some questions. Think about how strong these feelings are. Almost everyone's regret that I know falls into one of four categories, right? There's the strong feeling of lust. We all know how powerful lust is. We've all experienced the feeling of lust in our lives. And when we see it in our children or our siblings or a friend, and we say, oh, they think it's love, but it's actually lust, but the feeling is so powerful that they make decisions based on it, that's that's a time when it might be good to step back and ask some questions. What about fear? Fear is an extraordinarily strong feeling. Many times, the biggest regrets of our life aren't actually things that we did. The biggest regrets of our life are things we didn't do because we were afraid. But what if it was possible to step into something even though you were afraid and you didn't let the fear grip you? There's the emotion or feeling of worry, of concern over what might happen or what might go wrong or how could this go? And a lot of times, worry keeps us from making the right decisions in our lives. There's a sense of vengeance. When you've been wronged by someone else, when she cheated on you or he cheated on you or you got fired and you didn't deserve it and you have the chance, you have the steering wheel. You have it. And you can either seek revenge, make them pay a price for what they did to you, or you cannot. But when those feelings of vengeance are there, oh my goodness, it will create a fog. And if you keep going, you may just pay a penalty. How do I identify these four things? Well, they're true in all the pastoral conversations that I have. And they are actually the thing Jesus identified. If you read Matthew chapter 5, in his longest teaching called the Sermon on the Mount, he says, these things will hook you. So if those strong feelings create a fog, then how do you find clarity? And I think one of the ways, this is just a simple way to think about it, to find clarity, you separate these two questions. One question is, what might happen to me? I might get fired. I might be alone. I might, whatever. There's a different question, a better question, which is, what might happen to my story? This is a short-term question, mostly about how I'm going to feel tomorrow. This is a long-term question, mostly about how my life is going to play out with the people around me. And I want to encourage you, when you're in that fog and you know an emotion is driving you to just keep going, to stop and say, what might happen to my story? Now, one of the most fascinating chapters in all of the Bible is in the New Testament. It's a book called Hebrews. And in Hebrews chapter 11, there's a story after story after story of people who lived by faith. And they ended up getting their story told in Hebrews chapter 11. I'm going to not read every single one of these stories to you, but I want you to hear a few of them because I think these stories are actually our stories. So what story do you want to tell? By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he's dead. Now, to me, this is the line. Abel still speaks even though he's dead. This is why we call it the legacy question. Your life actually lives beyond you. The story gets told about you. And you could put your name in here. It could be Greg still speaks even though he's dead. Now, one of the privileges of my role is that I get to participate in funerals from time to time. And whenever I prepare for a funeral, I'll gather the family and I'll just ask them to start telling me stories about the person who passed away. And one of the ways that I do it, some of you have sat in my office and we've done this, is I just tell people, I'm like, hey, you just tell stories. I'm going to sit over here and write. And then I always say, hey, and by the way, if you tell a story that you don't want me to use in the service, you need to let me know, okay? And without fail, I think in every room I've ever been in, I'm writing down a story. Oh, that one's funny. That one's good. That one's noble. And then someone says, but he, but she. And it's so fascinating to me. Like even very freshly after someone's passed away, the people who are closest to that person, there's this thing inside of us that says we're going to tell the story honestly. Now, it does get edited before the funeral service. But it's worth asking ourselves the question, what still speaks about you even after you're dead? In some families, there are legends. In Jenny's family, Grandma Iney, actually go back for a second. Grandma Iney still speaks even though she's dead. Go back to that slide, yep. Even though she's dead. And people try to live up to Grandma Iney's life, and they aspire to be like her because her life was inspiring. The stories that get told about her, it's so fascinating to me. In my family, my dad is a legend. Now, let me tell you a little thing about my dad. My dad was a businessman. He was in agriculture in small town West Central Illinois, but among agribusinessmen, my dad was a legend in that world. How many of you know who Orion Samuelson is, right? Not very many of you, because you don't care about the price of pork bellies. That's the problem, right? But Orion Samuelson had a 60-year career actually on WGN radio. I always remember this. I'd think, I want to listen to the Cubs lose another game. So I'd turn on WGN radio. And right before the Cubs game, it would be Orion Samuelson. He was the agricultural reporter. And one time he interviewed my dad. He gave him this picture. He said, "Warren, thanks for a great interview. Orion Samuelson." And my dad, in that realm of the world, he was a legend. But when we sat down with the pastor to talk about his life, this is my point. Nobody cared about that. You see, one of the things that's true about a lot of people's story, maybe the story you're writing right now, is there's a version of your story that matters maybe in your work world, maybe in your professional world, and maybe that matters a lot to you and your ego world. But that story doesn't actually matter at all to the people who are right around you. And it would be worth all of us pausing to say, what story is my life telling? How will your life speak even when you're dead? The passage goes on, it says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. You may or may not know the story of Noah, but he had a steering wheel in his hand, and he could either not build the ark or build the ark. And not building the ark actually would have been a very popular answer with all of the people around him. Building the ark was not a popular answer with the people around him, but it was a holy fear that caused him to turn right, and it saved his family. And I think one of the ways you ought to think about shaping your story is to ask yourself, am I turning in the direction of a healthy, holy fear of God? And is it saving my family? Or am I turning the other way? By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place that he would later receive as inheritance, obeyed and went, here's the line, even though he didn't know where he was going. When God asked Abraham to step out in faith and say, I'm not going to paint the whole picture for you. I'm not going to give you the whole map. I'm not going to guarantee the whole future, but I am asking you to go. And you're worried and you're afraid and you're leaving what you know and you're leaving your wealth behind. Are you going to turn left, choose comfort, keep it easy? Or are you going to turn right and go where God leads you to go, even when you don't know where you're going? By faith, Sarah, who was past childbearing age. Now, Sarah is Abraham's wife. She was 90 years old. God had promised them a baby. She was past childbearing age, but was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. You know, my favorite thing about Sarah, she's the only woman who would ever be at Costco buying Depends and Pampers in the same visit. And God gave her this vision for her life. She was open to it. And it seemed crazy. And she just had to decide, which way am I turning? And she turned toward trust. Go back to her husband. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him. Do you know this story? God tested Abraham. He took him to the point of potentially sacrificing this son who came from his 90-year-old wife. God tested him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. He who embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. And in this sense, God tested him. And Abraham had to decide, am I bailing or am I trusting? And that single decision created the story that get told about him. They go on, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when in the end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Don't miss this. Why are these stories so powerful? It's because someone decided, just like you could, I'm not afraid of the king's edict. I'm not afraid of the natural consequences that seem like they could totally possibly happen if I go this way. I'm not afraid. And I don't know any more powerful decision that you and I will make in our lives than to make the right decision for the story of our lives, even when we're afraid. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He decided to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. I'm just telling you, why do we know Moses' name? Why is Moses a legend? Why does Moses have a legacy? It's not more complicated than this. He chose, let's go back for a second, he chose to be mistreated instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. It's not an easy decision to make. Most people don't make the decision. Most people, the story of their life is, well, he didn't want to be mistreated. He had it good at home, so he just went and enjoyed it. And they chose comfort over changing the world. And I'm just kind of pleading with you, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, to not let that be your story. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. And he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, people who passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the prostitute, Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Please don't miss this. Sometimes we set the course of our life from a blank slate and we decide where we're going to go. Sometimes we find ourselves, Rahab, in a place that actually is full of shame. But with the power of a single decision, your story can change. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and all the prophets who through faith, get this, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. Who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength. Friends, it's possible that I believe in you more than you believe in you, but it is not possible that I believe in you more than God believes in you. And I believe he has placed something inside of you that he has in mind to write a great and noble story. And you may never make headlines about it, but the people who are closest to you know that I had the chance to turn left or I had the chance to turn right. And a lot of times the chance came with pain, or it came with mistreatment, or it came with not taking revenge, or it came with not being afraid. But I took it. And this is what's so powerful to me. I'll give you a little picture into my life here. Let me go back to the end of that verse. Or not. The end of that verse turned weakness into strength. And here's what I want you to hear. When you make a decision that honors God, it's a tough decision, but you see him be faithful to it, it will turn your weakness into strength. When I first came to Suncrest 25 years ago, Suncrest was a brand new church. It was me at a high school, had no money or very little money for my staff position. And I had to go around to my friends and my family and ask them to give money for the first 2 years so I could come here. Most people thought, Greg, you're dumb. Why don't you go to a church that can pay you? Right? It's turned out okay. But this is what I need you to hear. It was that single decision that I saw God be faithful to, even though it didn't really make sense, that turned a weak kid into somebody who had strength. Because when everything's pulling you to turn left, but you sense God is telling you to turn right, and you turn right, and then you find out when you follow God, he's faithful. Guess what happens in the next decision? When everything wants to pull you left next time and you want to turn right, you turn right again because you saw what God did. And he turns that weakness into strength. And you have to build this muscle in your life, and it creates the story of your life of being the person. And what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that you sensed God was leading you to something and you got it wrong. And you didn't make it. And what's the story that gets told about you afterwards? Here's the story that gets told. They tried to trust God with their life. They misread a situation, but my goodness, they were going to do what they thought God wanted them to do. So powerful. So, the story of your life is defined by both your aim and your adjustments. I want to ask you to seriously think about this week. The aim is essentially the blank slate. You're looking into the future. There's a dream. There's a difference that you want to make. There's something going on. You get the chance to set the course from a clean start. But you have to decide that I'm going to stick with that course and keep making the decisions even when it's hard. But for a lot of our lives, tragedy comes. Circumstances change. Things you couldn't see. Things that were out of your control. They start to intersect with your life. And actually, I think even as much as aim is important in creating the story of your life, being able to adjust to circumstances matters even more. So last week, if you were here, I asked you to stand in front of a mirror. It was awkward, wasn't it? Those of you who actually did it, it was awkward. You stand in front of the mirror, you ask yourself some questions, you're looking at yourself and your life. And again this week, I'm going to ask you to stand in front of the mirror and just ask yourself this question. Where is my story off right now? And you probably should fast forward to the end of your life and think, hey, this is totally possible that your kids are going to actually sit in a room with me when you die. And they're going to tell stories about you. And I pray that your life is still speaking even when you're dead. But my greater prayer is that your life is speaking the things you want it to speak. You're leaving the legacy that you want to leave. And it's all because you looked in the mirror and you said, actually, right now, I'm not on course for that. So, how to decide? I will be noble in my aim, and I will be humble in my adjustments. The adjustments are the hard part. They're the places where, rooted in last week, we have to be honest and say the story my life's telling right now is not the story I want to tell. The circumstances I find myself in right now are not the circumstances that I anticipated, and I don't want them to be my circumstances at the end. But I will be humble enough to make adjustments to set the story, to reset the story. And I think every time the right answer is to be noble in your aim. You don't want the story to go, and I lied, and I compromised, and I went for revenge, as easy as that is. You want the story of your life to be, she was generous. She did the right thing even when it was hard. He changed my life. He sacrificed for us. He was noble. He took the high road. And so wherever you are in your life and whatever point your story is at when you walked in here today, I want you to set the course ahead, and you know you have the wheel to turn left or right. I'm asking you to turn toward nobility every time.
Before you turn off this video, hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel. And until then, go and be the church.